Working the graveyard shift at the lonely gas station was a daunting task, but it was the only job that would hire me after I'd lost my previous one. The flickering fluorescent lights cast eerie shadows on the dimly lit convenience store, and the muted hum of the ancient cooler was the only company I had. That night, as a thick blanket of fog settled over the area, I found myself contemplating my unfortunate life choices. My name is Emily, and it was the third week since I had reluctantly taken this job. I couldn't help but feel the weight of desperation clinging to my shoulders like a heavy winter coat. Desperation, I thought, was a far more terrifying word than any horror story I'd ever heard. My shift was dragging on, each minute feeling like an eternity, when a chilling, unexpected sound pierced through the monotonous drone of the gas pumps. It was a sharp metallic clank, like the noise of a crowbar hitting a concrete floor. My heart skipped a beat, and my fingers clenched around the baseball bat I'd propped up behind the counter. I cautiously ventured outside, scanning the desolate parking lot through the foggy windows, only to find it empty. My footsteps echoed eerily as I walked around the gas station, my mind struggling to grasp the source of that unsettling noise. As I returned to my post, a car slowly rolled into the dimly lit lot. The driver's side door creaked open and a man emerged. He was disheveled, his clothes tattered, and his eyes bore a wild, frenzied look. His ashen face and trembling hands sent shivers down my spine. He stumbled toward the counter, mumbling incoherently. I asked if he needed assistance, but all he did was extend a bloodied hand, revealing a gaping wound on his palm. My fear turned to empathy, and I rushed to retrieve the first aid kit. With trembling hands, I bandaged his injury, and he murmured something about escaping from something sinister, his voice trembling. Despite my fear, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the stranger. I offered him a cup of hot coffee and a place to sit while he collected his thoughts. He introduced himself as Victor and explained that he had been on the run from a group of dangerous individuals who had attacked him. He was unsure if they had followed him here, and the gas station seemed like a haven from the terrors he had faced. The minutes turned into hours as Victor recounted his harrowing tale, and a bond of shared fear and vulnerability grew between us. We began to hear faint, haunting whispers and eerie footsteps coming from the fog outside. My heartbeat quickened as Victor and I exchanged anxious glances. The sinister aura that had engulfed the gas station had not disappeared, and it became clear that the evil he was running from was drawing near. As the night deepened, we made the decision to lock all the doors and hunker down, clutching our makeshift weapons as the horrifying sounds outside grew louder and more persistent. Our ordeal lasted through the long, cold night, and the first rays of dawn finally pierced through the fog, casting an eerie light on the gas station. When the morning shift attendant arrived, we shared our chilling experience with him, and he promptly called the authorities. They soon arrived, discovering evidence of a terrifying ordeal on the outskirts of that desolate gas station. As it turned out, Victor had been the victim of a dangerous cult, and the horrors he had described were all too real. We had narrowly escaped becoming unwitting participants in their malevolent rituals. From that night on, the gas station on Route 66 became a place that no one dared to visit after dark, and I realized that real-life horrors could be far more terrifying than anything the imagination could conjure. It was one of those stifling summer nights when the air hung heavy, and every breath felt like a gulp of warm soup. I was a weary traveler, 1,000 miles from home, seeking refuge at a remote gas station nestled off the beaten path. The neon open sign flickered lazily, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement as I pulled in. The place seemed like a relic of another era, the kind you see in a low-budget horror movie, complete with buzzing fluorescent lights and rusty gas pumps. I knew the convenience store's aging air conditioner couldn't possibly combat the oppressive heat, but I needed gas and some snacks to keep me awake during the long drive. As I approached the dimly lit store, the familiar chime of the bell above the door tinkled softly, and I found myself the only customer. The clerk behind the counter, a gaunt man with sunken eyes and a scruffy beard, gave me a weary nod. I grabbed a cold drink from the refrigerator and headed to the counter, the cold linoleum floor creaking beneath my feet. It was then that I noticed something unsettling. The walls were lined with faded, yellowed newspaper clippings, all featuring stories about missing persons and unsolved mysteries in the area. I shivered as the eerie atmosphere sank in, and I quickly paid for my items. As I left the store, the clerk leaned in closer, his eyes bearing a strange intensity. "Be careful out there, stranger," he whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. "This place ain't what it seems at night." I nodded, more out of politeness than genuine concern, and made my way back to my car. The night had grown darker, the moon a mere sliver in the sky, and the only source of light was the pale glow of the gas station's flickering signs. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place, but I pushed it aside as paranoia. With the fuel nozzle clutched tightly in hand, I began filling my tank. The mechanical sound of the gasoline pumping and the chirping of crickets in the distance provided some semblance of normalcy. But then, a rustling noise from the surrounding woods caught my attention. The dark tree line seemed to conceal something just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. My heart quickened as I strained to see through the shadows. Suddenly, the same clerk burst out of the store, sprinting towards me with wild eyes and outstretched arms. "Get away from there," he shouted, panic in his voice. "Hurry, come inside." I didn't question him. I jumped into my car, leaving the gas pump behind, and followed him back into the store. As I slammed the door shut, the clerk locked the entrance, his face drained of color. "They come out at night," he stammered. "You're lucky you didn't become their prey." I finally managed to coax an explanation from the clerk. He revealed a horrifying truth. The woods surrounding the gas station were inhabited by a group of individuals who had taken up a sinister cult-like existence. They preyed on unsuspecting travelers, luring them into the woods, and those who entered never returned. The newspaper clippings on the walls were testimonies to their macabre activities. The police were called, and the cult was eventually exposed and dismantled. The remote gas station on the edge of nowhere was forever changed, and I was just one of the lucky few who escaped an unthinkable fate that night. As I continued my journey, I couldn't help but wonder how many others had crossed paths with the malevolent cult, never to be seen again. The experience left me forever haunted by the eerie, treacherous world that could be lurking just beyond the familiar glow of the gas station's neon lights. Working the night shift at the gas station was a lonely and monotonous ordeal, a necessity born out of my struggle to make ends meet. On this particular night, the clock had just struck midnight, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed irritably, casting eerie, flickering shadows throughout the convenience store. I was the sole employee, my only company a stack of magazines and the occasional hum of a car passing on the desolate highway outside. Just as I began to succumb to the relentless tedium, the shrill chime of the door signaled the arrival of a customer. I looked up to find a man, his face partially obscured by a hood and a scarf, which immediately sent a chill down my spine. The telltale signs of a potential robbery were unmistakable. The stranger approached the counter with an unsettling calm, his eyes locked on mine as if trying to discern the extent of my fear. My heart pounded like a drum as he slid a crumpled $20 bill across the counter. "Fill her up," he said in a low, menacing voice. I nodded, fumbling for the gas pump key with trembling hands. As I headed out to the gas island, I couldn't help but notice the glint of a gun concealed beneath his jacket. With my heart in my throat, I began to pump his gas, every drop feeling like an eternity. The stark realization that I was trapped in a holdup began to set in, and I prayed for a silent escape. That's when I saw the headlights of another car approaching, and my heart sank further. The driver was a police officer, or so I hoped, but the sinister glint in the stranger's eyes told me he had noticed the same. Panic surged within me as the officer's car pulled up to the pump behind the stranger's vehicle. The stranger, his face still obscured, paid no attention to the officer, but I saw the tension in his body language. The gun gripped tighter. The officer stepped out, taking cautious steps toward the pump, ready to address the customer. I thought salvation had arrived, but in a sudden, terrifying twist, the stranger drew his gun and fired a single shot. Chaos erupted. The officer dropped to the ground, clutching his leg in pain while the stranger bolted back toward his car, his hood now fallen to reveal a face contorted with desperation. I was left standing there, torn between the fallen officer and the fleeing criminal. Summoning every ounce of courage, I rushed to the wounded officer, dialing 911 on my cell phone. Blood oozed from his leg and he winced in pain, but he assured me he'd be all right. As I relayed our desperate situation to the dispatcher, the distant wailing of sirens grew steadily closer. Meanwhile, the stranger's escape plan was foiled. A squadron of police cars arrived with blaring sirens, their lights piercing the night. The criminal, now cornered, surrendered, his firearm clattering to the ground. In the end, the robber was arrested and the wounded officer was taken to the hospital. I was left with a newfound appreciation for life's fragility and the eerie reality of my night shift at the gas station. The incident would forever linger in my memory, a stark reminder of the perils that can unfold when working alone in the dead of night. But it also proved my resilience